You're now watching Sports Bettors Paradise on the Bet Rivers Network.
All right, Jimmy Ott and Paul Stone, as we continue our college football previews, we'll have picks all through the college football season. Paul Stone, one of the most respected handicappers of college football in the land. Let's get right to it, Paul. Let's talk about the Texas Longhorns. And one of the cool things about Bet Rivers' college football menu is the most wins in these high-profile teams, and one of them is Texas versus Oregon. The Oregon Ducks in their new league, and boy, they have a lot of expectations this year. You're leaning toward the Ducks having more wins than the Longhorns.
Yeah, I tell you, on this regular season win matchup, Oregon minus 150 there at Bet Rivers to have more regular season wins than Texas. And first of all, looking at what's shaping up to be college football's game of the year, at least in the preseason, third-ranked Oregon, currently a 2.5-point favorite at Bet Rivers over Ohio State in that huge matchup at Alton Stadium on October 12th. The only other game that's really going to be a tight line, if you look at game of the year markets, Oregon currently a 4-point road favorite in some of those at Michigan the first Saturday in November. So those two games are tightly lined. Other than that, though, they're going to be favored. Oregon, they stand to be favored outside of an injury in all 12 of the regular season games. And in 10 of those, they're going to be favored by double digits. So they don't have very many losable games, in my opinion. I think Oregon likely gets 11 wins in the regular season. 10 really feels like a disappointment for this team. They've really ramped up their roster. Nike founder Phil Knight obviously heavily funding their NIL program, which has helped their roster, gain some key players on both offense and defense. Last year, first of all, the Longhorns, they win 11 regular season games. They obviously made the 4-team playoff last year, and the last year of that 4-team playoff. But they survived some close calls last year. And those close calls came against the likes of Houston, Kansas State, and TCU. You have one play go the other way, and Texas could have lost any or all of those games for sure. So they were lucky. They were fortunate to make the playoff when it gets down to it. This year, their first year in the SEC, even against a gift-wrapped, SEC schedule, they've got a much easier schedule than Oklahoma in conference. Those close wins last year in the Big 12 might become narrow defeats this year in the SEC. So I think Oregon's clearly an 11-win team. I don't think Texas is going to win 11 games in the regular season. I like Oregon minus 150 regular season wins over Texas there.
Once upon a time, Oregon was a rent-a-win for teams before Phil Knight's money started getting in there, and they made that first Rose Bowl back in the day with Brooks as their coach. But still, now he is, kind of deep into his life. He's ramping it up even more. Basically, kind of reminds me of an old Sherwood Blunt, but it's a Pony Excess. If this is the way the game is played, game on. I mean, Oregon is a major factor in the recruiting battles right now. So, and we don't get any credit for giving out minus $4 favorites, but I just don't know how you're going to keep them out of a 12-team playoff, Paul. So minus 400 is available right now at Bet Rivers. If you could tie it into some other parlays, maybe that. And an early season, this is available, the games of the year at Bet Rivers as well. Great extensive college football menu. And that is Texas, Michigan, that trip to Ann Arbor. Texas at Bet Rivers right now, Paul, is minus 3.
Yeah, Jimmy, and while I do expect Oregon to have more regular season wins than Texas, I do like Texas in this spot. On an earlier podcast when we previewed the Big Ten, I recommended Michigan not to make college football's 12-team playoff at minus 139 there at Bet Rivers. And I'm basically doubling down here on my belief that this is at least a 3-loss team. First of all, in recent days, we have learned that Michigan is accused of violating NCAA rules in a draft of the organization's notice of allegations, much of those accusations relating to advanced scouting and sign stealing, stuff that we heard a lot about last year. So word is out that their new first-year head coach, Sharon Moore, he could face suspension as a result of this investigation and possible sanctions. So that obviously wouldn't be a good thing. And the Wolverines, even before all this came to light a few days ago, they already had plenty of on-the-field questions to answer heading into the 2024 season. First of all, They lost their head coach, obviously Jim Harbaugh, to the NFL, their national championship winning head coach. Now they promote Moore, the former offensive coordinator, to head coach, and he's in unfamiliar territory. He's never been a head coach before, and not only is he a head coach at the major college level, he's the head coach of one of the winningest programs in the history of college football. So this is quite an adjustment. Some guys make that jump from coordinator to head coach fairly seamlessly and have success. Quite a few others don't. So the jury's still out on Sharon Moore as the CEO of the University of Michigan. The Wolverines also have to replace a school record 13 players who were drafted in the NFL draft this past April. That includes their quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, who was the 10th overall pick in the draft. They have 5 candidates vying for that quarterback job, apparently. None of them really that tested, so they've got some questions there at quarterback. You look at Texas, on the other hand, they do return a veteran team. They don't really have any huge questions. They have a quarterback, veteran quarterback of their own in Quinn Ewers, who's one of the top contenders for the Heisman Trophy. And you just look at this Texas team, and I believe they've got the schedule, or the roster rather, to stroll into Ann Arbor in week 2 and take down the Wolverines. If you'll remember, in week 2 last year, the Longhorns went into Tuscaloosa and rode the Tide. So they are capable travelers. I like Texas -3. I think they're going to beat Michigan by a touchdown or more.
September 7th, I love the position of the game. Yeah, and like you said, Paul, so much more in place for Texas entering the season early on. Then, if this game was in November, it might be a different situation. Teams like Michigan with so much turnover in their personnel and their staff is also. It could be a completely different team, but I like the pick as well. And I think that 3, I think if you like it, you might want to get it on it right now. I can see that going up just a notch or 2. Looking at one that I like, Paul, and so the SEC came in and they decided that every team, the existing 14 teams, are going to play either Oklahoma or Texas. So Oklahoma and Texas will play each other, and then the other 7 games they're decided by the league. And let's face it, that Oklahoma got the short end of the stick. So non-conference should be 4-0, and I'll throw in South Carolina as a pencil that as a W as well. That's 5 games on the positive side. But then Texas is favored by 8.5. Ole Miss is favored by 6. Ole Miss in Oxford coming off of a bye. Missouri is favored by 3 over Oklahoma, coming off of a bye against Oklahoma in that game. And then they end up a little Bama LSU back-to-back to close out the season after that tough conference stretch. That's going to take its toll on the Oklahoma Sooners. I think it's a 7-5 a season, plus money right now at Bet Rivers at plus 118. Welcome to the league, Sooners. Here's your schedule for the first 2 years. I like the Sooners under 7.5 plus 118.
Yeah, this one didn't quite make my official selections for purpose of this podcast today, but I'm with you here. First of all, they were replacing Dylan Gabriel with Jackson Arnold, a true sophomore who did start the bowl game last year. He threw 3 interceptions in the bowl loss to Arizona. Jackson Arnold, though, is a 5-star recruit. He was a big-time quarterback in the state of Texas, but he still hadn't played much, so the jury's still out on Arnold. And like you said, the SEC schedule that they draw in the first year, they've got home games against Tennessee and Alabama, so those are very difficult home games. And they've got those road trips that you mentioned to Ole Miss, Missouri, and Auburn, plus that neutral site game there at the State Fair of Texas against the Texas Longhorns. So they got a very difficult schedule. They got the short end of the stick their first year in the SEC, and I think this is a team that wins 7 games or fewer this year.
Yes, indeed. All right, moving on to in the conference, my next play, and that is Tennessee. And this is one I know over 9. Man, be careful. You're asking a team to go 10-2. Well, I think 10-2 is way more probable than 8-4 for Tennessee. Hear me out. So 3 rent wins. Okay, NC State and Charlotte. They'll split the stadium. It's in the state of North Carolina, but trust me, Tennessee will have at least 50% of the crowd there. They're 4.5-point favorites right now in that game, but I have them winning that one. They're going to beat Vandy, and Vandy's a road game. Your biggest concerns in the SEC, these stadiums rock, baby. I mean, it is tough sledding on the road in the SEC. So that is a gift to play Vanderbilt as one of your road conference games. They have Kentucky at home, check. Mississippi State at home, Florida at home, check, check, check. That's 8 wins, and I'm conceding a loss at Georgia. So 8-1, and then we've got at Oklahoma, which Oklahoma's a 3-point favorite, very competitive, and then Alabama at home, where they are a slight favorite in a slight underdog, I think 1.5 in that one. So those are 2 toss-up games. You split those, and it comes down to at Arkansas. Arkansas is not on the level of Tennessee, but on the road, that could be a tricky spot. And historically, they have had some battles in Fayetteville. Tennessee's coming off of a bye at Arkansas in that game as well. So it's 9 or 10, but I just don't see 8 in this picture. So I'm going with the Tennessee Volunteers over 9, and I like this quarterback better than Joe Milton. Man, Hooker, you saw when Heupel has a guy that can fling it. I mean, and Hooker, that offense was as good as anybody's in the country that year. Milton just never improved as a passer. And so now they got the guy. We know he can run, and we know he can pass at least as good as Milton. So I really like Tennessee, and a little stability, a little continuity within their staff and their program with Heupel in another year at the run. Tennessee over 9 is plus money right now at Bet Rivers at plus 115. Paul, let's get to the Missouri Tigers, and we both have an opinion on the Missouri Tigers. The Tigers won 11 games last year. They won a bowl game, Ohio State. One of my things is beware of those bowl victories. They can be overrated. That was not Ohio State's real team that they played in the bowl game. But they are back, and you've looked at the menu to make or miss the playoffs, and you're looking at them to miss the playoffs. They're minus 275 to miss the playoffs. That's a hefty number, but you've got to have a strong opinion on that to lay that number.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, when you're making these bets, you have to consider the number, and this is almost 3-1, but I just don't think Missouri's going to lose 2 football games or less. I think they're going to be a 3-loss team or more. I mean, you talked about last year, that 10-win regular season, and much like you, that was a watered-down Ohio State team that they beat in the bowl game. Certainly no fault of the Tigers, no fault of Missouri, but that wasn't Ohio State that they beat there. And you look at their previous 8 seasons to last season, 2015 through 2022, they were 4 games under 500 those 8 seasons. Obviously, there's no question that fifth-year head coach Eli Drinkwitz, he has really elevated this roster. They're not like those teams of 8 years prior to last year. They are better. They have better personnel. They've got a veteran quarterback coming back in Brady Cook. They've got arguably the top receiver, certainly one of the top 3 receivers in college football in Luther Burden. So they do have some talent, and he has upgraded that roster. But they've got some big-time questions, some big-time losses, and most of those losses being on defense. And then secondly, they had some things go their way last year in 2023. So first of all, to talk about that defense, they had 5 players off that defense selected in last April's NFL draft. So that's a lot of talent. That was off a defense that allowed just over 20 points a game, one of the better defensive units in the whole SEC. And they didn't lose a bunch of, 6th and 7th rounders. One of their guys, defensive end Darius Robinson, picked in the 1st round. Cornerback Ennis Rakestraw selected in the 2nd round. And then linebacker Tyron Hopper picked in the 3rd round. So they had players at all 3 levels picked in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. So that defense, Jimmy, it's not going to be as good. It's still probably going to be pretty good, but it's not going to be as good as it was in 2023. You look at their offense, they certainly return a whole lot of personnel on offense. I mentioned Cook and Burden, but they lose Cody Schrader, the big running back who played 1 season there in Columbia. He rushed for over 1,600 yards last year. That's a lot of yardage. And they bring in a couple of group of 5 guys, Nate Noel from Appalachian State and Marcus Carroll from Georgia State. They played well and were productive at that level, but I don't think they replace the total production of Cody Schrader in that running game. So I think even that offense is going to be down a tick. So then you look at some of the things, the statistical measures that went their way last year that may regress to the mean, if you will. They were plus 10 in turnovers. They were +4 in what I call net close games, being games decided by 7 points or fewer. And then they were +3 in net upsets, meaning that they won 3 games outright as the betting underdog, and they lost 0 games outright as the betting favorite. Those things kind of tend to come back to the norm, if you will. They have don't have a particularly arduous schedule by SEC standards. They do have 3 gimmies in the non-conference, but they've got road trips to Texas A&M and Alabama, plus a road trip to South Carolina that could be a little bit tricky. And then they have home games against Oklahoma, and even Auburn could be a challenge, even there in Columbia. So I just don't think this Missouri Tiger team is any better than a 9-3 team. I think they're probably an 8-win team. But with that schedule and 3 losses, I don't think they're going to get in. I like Missouri not to make the college football playoff at -275 there at Bet Rivers.
Yeah, again, the biggest thing in handicapping college football this year in the conference realignment is how team schedules would be affected. And some of the teams from the SEC East were going to have to step up in class with their schedule. You mentioned the defense last year, Paul, and I think some of those numbers, which were okay, fairly respectable, but I think they were schedule related. When they played teams that actually could move the ball a little bit, 49, it was pick 6 at the end, but LSU went up and down the field. I mean, Kentucky scored 21 on them. Florida scored 31 on them. I just, and they lost their 5 best players, on that side of the ball. That was not a great unit to begin with. Now, look, Luther Burden is the most respected offensive weapon in the league, period. He was a highly, highly recruited player, and Drinkowitz does a lot of creative ways to get him the ball in space. So he knows how to do it. Cook is good. Cook is really good. So I don't know what kind of NFL prospect he is, but as far as he's fine. But that is a ton of production at the running back position, like you talked about, and it's a great story too. But things were kind of set up for them last year. And so look, I'll give it to you. I mean, they've got games. They got 6 games where I don't think they can lose. So let's focus on the other 6. So I'm not ready to pencil in a win at home in Columbia against Auburn. Hugh Freeze in his second year, they're going to be better. Just how much better, we don't know. But I'm not ready to do that just yet. And then they got a game against Oklahoma. And then all 4 games on the road at A&M, at Bama, and then at South Carolina and Starkville are back-to-back to close out the season. So when they get toward the end of right before they play their rivalry game against Arkansas, which could be tricky, a little tricky as well. We never know what Arkansas has. But I just think there's too many 50-50 games in their competitive games to think they're going to get win done. I'm double barrel pick for you here. Not only Chick-fil-A has that double barrel drive-through. So anyway, I'm going with Missouri under 9.5. Laying a little juice right there at -143 at Bet Rivers, but I like Missouri under 9.5 as well. Let's move on to the state of Texas and the Texas A&M Aggies. This is schedule. This is one of the funnest schedules, the most entertaining for college football fans, period. And that is they've got their 3 rental wins, and then all 9 other games are competitive. They play the tougher teams at home. They play the weaker teams on the road in some hostile environments. So, home games against Notre Dame, Missouri, LSU, and Texas. Weaker teams on the road at Florida, at Mississippi State, at South Carolina, at Auburn. Unless it's at Vanderbilt, there are no gimmies on the road in the SEC. This is, they're going to lose more than 3 games. This is a 7. Before I look at the lines, I do my own handicap and I do my own thing. I had this at 7.5. It's at 8.5. That's considerable. This is my favorite pick in the SEC this year, and that's Texas A&M under. Now, you say, Elko did a great job. Sat right here at this table last year, Paul, and told you how much I love the Duke Blue Devils because of their starting 44. They're too deep. It was like 38 juniors and seniors. And they had a really good athlete, a dual threat, at quarterback who Notre Dame scooped up pretty quickly in Riley Leonard. They're really good. They were on the way to some big things. Probably should have beat Notre Dame in that game before he went down. I think Notre Dame converted a wild 4th and 24 to kind of keep their hopes alive. I knew it was 4th and long, trust me. But anyway, And so I think Elko's going to do a good job. Elko within the coaching industry is highly respected. They're going to be a line of scrimmage team. They're going to be physical. They're going to, how to block and tackle. And maybe less mercenary approach. Listen, everybody has a level of mercenary approach, okay, right now with Oregon, Ohio State, and everybody else is doing. So I don't want to, try and poo-poo that too bad. But it is a culture transition. And Elko is trying to filter out and purge some of the ones who were worried about just their NIL coming in and who wants to actually play football. That is not an easy thing, especially in year one with 9 competitive games under 8.5 for the Aggies for me.
And I'm with you here. This is one that almost made my list as well. New head coach Mike Elko, former defensive coordinator there at Texas A&M. I'm really impressed with the way Mike Elko's recruiting. We're not really talking about that right now. But, his record at Duke, the ACC, not particularly a tough conference, and Duke, fairly not a historical football power. But in ACC games, he was only 9-7 at Duke in 2 seasons. So it's not like he, swept through the conference. They've got a quarterback that they're high on, Connor Wegman, but he was hurt most of last year. He's only played 9 games of college football. So it's not like he's got a wealth of experience. As would be expected in a coaching transition, have a lot of players coming and going through the transfer portal. Many pundits ranked A&M as one of the winners in the transfer portal, and I really don't see it that way. They lost a lot of, and I know these were probably not culture fits at Texas A&M. They were perhaps some of the problem and maybe addition by subtraction, so to speak. But a lot of the guys they bring in are group of 5 guys, and the SEC is not the group of 5. Now, right. Nick Scourton, who they got from Purdue, who's actually from Bryan College Station, he's returning home. He's a big-time edge rusher. He'll be one of the best edge guys in the SEC from day one. But they're 10-14 the last 3 years in the SEC, so 4 games under 500, and also 4 games under 500 in their last 28 games versus Power 4 schools. They're 12-16 in their last 28 straight up versus the Power 4. So I'm with you there. I don't think A&M's gonna win 8 games, any more than 8 games this year.
Only laying minus 103 at Bet Rivers as well. I respect the heck out of Elko and the job that he's doing, and I think he's going to do it, but not this year. Not this year. And I just wanted to point to the Duke. Hey, man, it's hard. It's a hard place to win. I mean, there ain't no doubt about it. But last year, with all of that experience in an athlete at quarterback, that was their year. He moved at just the right time. So, when you make a coaching change at a high-profile program like A&M these days, your roster is, just rated, picked apart, and ain't coming for you weaker players. So, A&M minus 8.5, minus 103. Paul, the last one you got, the most wins. Love this part of the betting menu at Bet Rivers as far as the wins, total wins. And we talk about hard schedules. There's tough schedules, and then there's Florida. The Florida Gators, Sunbelt Billy Napier, my goodness, people like to beat him up right now, but this is, man, I feel for my boy right now. My goodness, this is tough. Samford, that's it. And in 11 tough games, they ain't no tougher one. And because in the era where everybody's got these rent wins, we just 3 rent wins, 4 rent wins, 2 rent wins with these teams. They have Samford. That's it. Central Florida's good. Miami is favored over them. And then you end up at Florida State, and those last 5 games are unbelievably tough. And then you go to Tallahassee to end it against your rivalry. Nobody's got a tougher schedule. And nobody had more attention on their program than in Boulder, Colorado. Boulder, Colorado, and Florida. There is who's more wins between Colorado and Florida. Who you got, Paul?
Yeah, this one's line. You pay heavy juice on Colorado. Colorado minus 167 over Florida. And I tell you, we'll get to that schedule in a little bit. But from Florida's perspective, thank the Lord for the Bulldogs of Birmingham, Samford, because there are no tap-ins on that schedule other than Samford. Looking at Colorado, first of all, taking Colorado in this matchup, which is the side I'm going to recommend, me taking Colorado certainly shouldn't imply that I have the Buffaloes rated higher than Florida. because I don't. Florida actually is 6.5 points higher in my power rating than Colorado, so almost a full touchdown better than Colorado. But is often the case, and we've talked about it already several times this year, it's all, or at least mostly, about the schedule in Florida. You know, they play almost inarguably the toughest schedule in the nation. I don't know how anybody impartial, without skin in the game, could look at all the schedules and say that this is not the toughest one. I mean, they've got non-conference games at home, but non-conference games against Miami, Florida, and Central Florida, who I think Central Florida is going to be one of the surprises in college football this year. And then the final week, of course, the whole SEC schedule as a whole is very, very difficult, but the final 5 weeks of the regular season, they get Georgia in that annual neutral site game in Jacksonville, which is obviously, I think, what are the Bulldogs? They're 41-2 over the last 3 years. That's a pretty good record. And then they have road trips the last 5 weeks to Texas and Florida State, and then they get to play at home LSU and Mississippi. Those 5 teams, what they have in common is they could all make the college football playoff. All 5 of them could make it. Probably 4 of them are going to make it at least. So a break-even season at 6-6 for Florida, man, that just seems like a huge accomplishment. 5 wins seems more like it for the Gators. In Colorado, if there's a more polarizing program in all of college football right now, I don't know who it would be. But you look at the Buffaloes, and potentially I think they have a top 25 type offense. Not a top 25 team necessarily, but that offense with Shedeur Sanders at quarterback, with Travis Hunter, the wide receiver, cornerback, dual standout there, and the wide receiver guys that they added. Wester comes over from Florida Atlantic. He had a 1,000-yard receiving season last year. So they got all kinds of skill talent. Last year, the offensive line was very weak. Colorado quarterbacks were sacked, I think, more than any team in the country. They do bring in, though, true freshman left tackle Jordan Seaton, the top offensive line in the in the nation in the class of 24, actually 19th overall recruit in the ESPN 300. So he's big time. I mean, he's like Will Campbell at LSU, that type of recruit. Kelvin Banks at Texas. He's going to start from day one. They're going to get better on the offensive line at that critical left tackle position from day one, even though Seaton's a true freshman. So I think Colorado's probably a break-even team. I think Colorado might make a bowl game this year, and I like Colorado minus 167, more regular season wins over Florida.
This is an all-time low as far as for Florida in my lifetime, you know, as far as their win total, the expectation. So, I mean, it is that schedule is something else. There's no doubt the league didn't do them any type of favors this year because the league is setting the schedule. You know, I mean, they're setting the schedule for this 2-year bridge period. So Colorado minus 167 more. No, Sanders is back. He should be better. Shedeur and Travis Hunter. But the thing is, they upgraded their skill guys were pretty quick last year. They upgraded them. He upgraded them. So just got to hustle some lime in there, Prime. So that would really complete your team. But they look like they would have a much more advantageous. They got a lot of fun games, a lot of 50-50 games this year in the Big 12. Big 12 wide open, man. It's going to be a fun league as well. We're looking forward to having a lot of fun for the college football season. Paul Stone and I will be back with more conference previews and all during the college football season picks for you as well. For Paul Stone, I'm Jimmy Ott here in the Sports Bettors Paradise on the Bet Rivers Network.